There's only one button. Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Amy. I work on the product team with Claudio, which is a delight because he usually warms up a crowd for me before I go on, so I do appreciate that. And today we're going to talk about scaling smarter with child sites. And you would not believe how much workshopping we did to come up with that title. But before I get started, I want to make this a little interactive because I've been sitting. So if you have heard of child sites before, pop your hand up. All right. Now keep your hand up if you are using child sites now. All right, those are my allies. And then I value inclusivity. So if you've never heard of child sites before, go ahead and pop your hand up. All right, you have the most to gain from this presentation. So come with me now as we go on a magical journey where I know how to use the remote. I don't know how to use the remote. Hey, there we go. Green is go. So here's what we're going to be covering. We're going to be talking about what child sites are, some of the problems that you can solve with child sites, and then best practices for if you decide to implement this into your process. And as you saw, many people are very familiar with and using child sites now. So this is really more of a reintroduction than a new feature. But we have added some really awesome capabilities to child sites over the last several months that have made them even more useful. So they're a much more mature feature, and chances are that there is something they couldn't do when you looked at them before that now they can do, and hey, everybody gets to learn something. So generally speaking, we'll talk about what child sites are. We'll talk about how they solve keeping things separate or access management, how they solve conflicting requirements where different people need different things, but they all need to use yourfiles.com, and how do you deal with that tension between those competing requirements, and how to use child sites for custom development. Do we have people writing code against the Files API in here? Oh, good, excellent. Nerds, I love it. And then we'll wrap up with how do you decide how to use child sites if you're going to use them. So, starting off, I have to lift something. The microphone? Yeah. If you're wondering why they gave me a handheld versus a lav, I am too. So, what are child sites? Child sites are sites that share your plan's storage and user allotment. So it's like splitting up your plan into separate sites. But they are their own independent sites. They don't impact each other. They don't touch each other. They are completely separate and sandboxed from one another. Like I said, they're not new, but we are really leaning into this as a but now I'm getting we're leaning into this as a great feature for helping people organize and deal with some of these weird sort of situations where sometimes I need it this way, but sometimes I need it that way, and you have one switch that I get to set. Okay, so here we have a scale model anatomical drawing of a parent site. So for purposes of vocabulary and internal jargon, de-jargoning, a parent site is what we call your main site in Files. So if you don't have any child sites right now, that's your parent site. And generally speaking, your parent site's just a box that all of your Files stuff lives in, including files, users, all of the configuration settings that you have, your automations, your remote servers, all of that. And it just is in its happy site. You go to acme.files.com, and there is your Acme site. A child site is kind of the same thing. It's its own container with its own set of stuff. And changing things in one site does not impact the other site. I can turn on regional routing and global acceleration in my parent site, but I could leave my child site maybe Canada only. And the point I want to make here is that you can keep adding lots and lots of child sites for all the different situations that you need. And the point I want to make here is I learned how to do transitions in PowerPoint. So you can keep going and have lots more of child sites. And one thing to know is that each of these is its own site. No child site impacts any other child site. Parent sites can impact child sites. So if we zoom in on this to talk about that a little bit, I want to add a little asterisk to the idea that these are totally separate from each other with their own files, their own users, and their own settings. See, a site administrator of a parent site is a site administrator of every child site. So they've got access to everything, any child site that you create, and all of those files, and they have that access directly through the parent site. So a parent site administrator can actually manage all of the child site files without leaving the parent site, and that is through the underscore folder. So is the underscore folder a new concept to anybody here? No? We're all familiar with it? Excellent, great. And in fact, that was a thing that Dave showed in his Automate Without Code with the automations moving things between remote servers. If you have child sites, you also have that tab for child sites, so you can use automations to move data back and forth between different child sites, or between the child and the parent and the child. So if you have something where you need to distribute files to a bunch of different child sites, you can basically just push the button in a single automation and have that delivered automatically. And then we have another asterisk here to the idea that files and users and settings in one site are separate from the other. And that is this notion that we can delegate access to people who aren't parent site administrators to those child sites. So while the site administrator parent site always has access to everything, they are super duper users, any user can be granted all of the individual granular permissions within a child site specific to little folders. So you can have someone who has write access to 2 folders in a single child site, but that user exists in the parent site. And where we see this really helpful is when you have a bunch of child sites that you need one person to have access to. And we don't like making 4 logins so that they remember which login to use to get to which site. So instead, they have one login for the parent site, and it can access all 4 of those sites. There we go. All right, so that is the child site feature summary. Just, laying the groundwork for this grand journey. They are standalone sites that do not impact one another, but you have that central control for parent site administrators. So there's only one parent, no matter how many child sites there are. You can delegate access, meaning that I can say this group has access to this child site. And actually, I didn't mention this before, but you can even designate special types of permissions. So unlike in a parent site, where the site administrator and the read-only administrator is just a little checkbox on the user, you can actually assign a group site administrator access to child sites, or read-only administrator access to child sites, which is really handy if you've got auditors who need to access multiple child sites. You just put all of them into the read-only admins group, and they've got that access. You don't have to go set up every single auditor. And then, of course, the parent site has access to all the child site data, and the automations can move data between the sites pretty seamlessly and pretty easily. All right, so got the fundamentals out of the way. Turn your attention, please, to this very scientific graph showing how, as you start using file transfer and your organization gets bigger, your file transfer needs become more complex. You start out with files.com because you needed an SFTP server. ADP requires SFTP to move payroll around. So you bought files.com, and there you are, file transfer sharing. And then you're like, hey, this has a lot of features. We could use some of these other features. So things get a little more complex because now marketing wants to use it one way, sales wants to use it another way, and legal absolutely refuses to allow either of them to do what they want. And then things get a little more complex because maybe you acquire a new company and they have different ways of doing things, and you don't want the users to see each other's files because there's actually some liability going on there. It's no longer just a matter of convenience, but is actually pretty important. And then you get up into super complex things where, well, because we're in this region, which has contracts with this government organization, we have to do things this way. But the other company is in this other region, and they have other laws that govern how things have to be. But we have one setting for how many days to keep files. So we're not going to go into too much more detail on most of this, but we are going to zoom in a little bit more on access management, which is making sure that people and systems only have access to what they actually need in your site. So access management comes into play when you have more parts of your business. As time goes by, as you go up on that curve, you're hiring more people doing more specialized roles. So now you can't just it's not as easy to add a new person to the system because maybe they have different requirements, maybe they need less access than the last person or different access. So it becomes more work just managing users. And there's lots of tools that are already here to help you with that. We have bulk import for users. You can set up an SSO provider. But there's also two big approaches that child sites helps when you really try and scale this out. And the first approach is the idea of centralizing the administration in the parent site. So basically, this is where users only exist in the parent site. They don't actually exist in the child site. So you've got that one login, people can access things, and all of it's managed from the parent site. Oh, and that reminds me, you guys see the new permissions audit export? There's a report now in the users page where you can export everything users have permissions to across your site. And it includes permissions that were delegated to child sites. So that's pretty cool. Now, if you're using an SSO provider, identity provider, Okta, Entra, that sort of thing, to manage your users, you can have them all log in through the parent site and be automatically redirected to the appropriate child site when you follow this approach, because they exist in the parent site, which is managed by SSO, and they don't have to know which site they need to go to get to, because the system says, oh, you only have permissions to child site A, and it brings up child site A automatically. Now, the other approach where child sites are really helpful when you're managing all of these new user requirements is the opposite. And that's where, instead of making it so we have one centralized automatic way of managing users in the parent site, we make it somebody else's problem in the child site. We say, hey, Amy, you're in charge of this child site. You're onboarding all the partners. You're managing what they have access to. You're making sure they get terminated when the partnership ends. And then that way, you don't have the problem where this site is primarily based in this time zone, but my admins are still asleep and can't set up a new account for 24 hours. So if you have that site admin in the child site where that time zone is, you get that quick turnaround on that. We actually have a customer that they aren't here. I'm really sad about that. But they do this software that essentially powers the county court systems of various counties. And so they use child sites to keep each of those counties separate because they need separate branding. You don't want people going to pay a traffic ticket for a site that isn't their county site. There's a trust issue there. And so one of the things they do is they give their customers that admin level access in their own site, and they don't even exist in the parent site. And then they don't have to worry about any kind of leakage. They could say, you have a logically isolated site, which is protected from every other customer. And in fact, I think they don't even mention every other customer site. But that's another story for another day. So I showed you these two very different ways of managing users with child sites and how this is great for when you start getting more people on board and having to deal with having more people on board. But how do you choose which one is the right one for you? And the great news is you don't have to choose. You can just set up a Frankensteinian mishmash of whatever works. So maybe you do have that thing where most of the users of a site are in another time zone, so you give them their own site administrator to manage it. But other sites, so you just delegate their access from the parent site. Whew, sorry, take a breath, Amy. Yeah. And so there is no one-size-fits-all solution, but you can use that in any combination that you want. So in this example, which is extremely concrete, we have this gray user in the parent site who has actually been delegated site admin access to child site B, and then they've gone and created their users in child site B. But we got child site A, which is its own site. Apparently nobody's been delegated any access to it, so they're standalone. And then in the last example, we've got the group that has been designated site admin access, and they're managing their own users in site C. So any way that you would need to match it that would actually make sense for your organization, that's all going to be possible here. All right, we're doing great, guys. We're through 2 of our 5 bullets, but it gets a lot simpler from here. So the next one that we're going to talk about is when you've got multiple departments that all need to use the site differently, which I'm pretty sure this is a fairly universal experience for anyone who has used files.com for more than 6 months. So this is where marketing started using the site, and they used it for sharing because they needed to do a lot of external sharing, but now legal's using it, and they're like, we can't share with people on that domain, are you crazy? And there's one domain blacklist. So what do? You split things up. We're calling this multiple teams, different needs. So I'm going to start with a story. It's a short story, don't worry, but it's good. So one of our customers is a medical company, and they had been based in the US, and they acquired another company in France. They're very excited, and they realized, like, about the day these papers were signed, that they had a data residency requirement. And so they couldn't just copy all the data over to their US site. And they didn't want to move their US site to France. So they spun up a child site on the Europe servers, set it so that the regional routing was appropriate for that. And because they were migrating data off a server that was already where the French company was, it was very fast because it was a very local transfer on that site. Oh, and I think we even get a bullet. There we go. Another thing that comes up is the ability to enable or disable snapshots. I'm pretty sure we have lots of ShareLink usage in here. Anybody snapshot ShareLink? No? Okay, well, snapshot ShareLinks are cool, but we did give you a way to turn them off. But the thing is, there's only one of those settings for the whole site, and so it may be that somebody says, hey, I can't have users uploading files for sharing, I need to disable this. But again, marketing's like, that's our job. So having the ability to say, okay, this site has this setting, and that site has that setting, this is helpful for those sorts of things. Oh, and here's another merger story for you. So we had a company who, they were legal services company, and they had their days to retain deleted files set to 7 days, because they didn't need more than that. If a file got deleted and they needed it restored, 7 days was plenty of time. They acquired another company, and that company required files to be retained for 10 years. So that's a 500x difference in their storage costs if they enabled that in their main site. So instead, guess what? They used child site for the company that they bought, and everybody got to have their data retention settings undisturbed. And then, of course, branding is a big thing that we associate with each individual site, and it is mostly possible to support multiple brands in a single site. You can set up your own SSL certificate that you have to manage, and you'll have multiple domains that you can access your site. But not everything completely brands. You only get one SMTP server. So if you need to use different SMTP servers per brand, you're kind of stuck. And ShareLinks will only go with the primary custom domain if you've got multiple domains going. So if you need to support like fully separate brands, like say you need to keep your B2B line completely separate from your B2C line, you need the same users working in both, but you don't want the brand to be presented as, powered by files.com, then you would use a child site for that sort of thing. So the way that this helps, the way that child sites solve this problem is, again, each child site has its own settings. So if I set the retention setting in my child site, it does not change my parent site. They do not break each other. Although, spoiler, we do have in the pipeline a feature for essentially locking or defaulting child site settings to what's going on in the parent site. So if you did have a setting that was like, I absolutely need this across my entire organization, no matter what, and you locked that to your parent site, then you've still got that central control even with the separation. All right, again, doing great, home stretch. So the last thing that we'll talk about is pretty straightforward. This would be dev environment. And this might actually have been the first thing you thought of when I talked about child sites being completely separate and any changes in a child site not impacting your parent site. So how do child sites support development or testing? They give you a sandbox to play in. And you can toss the sand around, you can throw paint in it, and it's not going to touch your parent site. It is discrete, and it encourages you to experiment. In fact, one of the uses that we suggest for child sites from time to time is if you're curious about the impact of a certain site setting, like what happens if I disable snapshots, then turn it on in a child site and see how that works out for you. Okay, so let's talk about what you need to keep in mind if you're like, hey, I'm really intrigued by this child site stuff. I think maybe it would be nice to have multiple sites that sort of organize things for me. So how do I get started? How do I even go with, I have this huge file site already, how would I want to split it? And the first thing to do is to look for where there are natural lines of separation. So multiple brands is a pretty obvious one. If you have a setting that is ruining your life because it only works for some of your use cases, that might be a place to split things. If you have regional requirements now, I need some data to always stay in the USA, and I need everything to be fast when I connect to it, but I need other data to only be in the EU, and I need it to be fast when I connect to it, then that is a natural place to look at changing things. And if you start some sort of new partnership or new contract where now you have new compliance requirements that you haven't had to have before, and you don't want to put those into play and impact everybody who's already using your system, that may be a pretty natural place to look at, could a child site solve this problem? And having identified places where, hey, maybe a child site will help, the other thing is to keep in mind that standardizing the things that it makes sense to standardize is going to decrease the mental load of managing your file site. So if you have some things that we always do this, then having that implemented as an SOP for your organization is going to make it simpler as you choose to bring up a new child site. But by the other token, when it makes sense to let self-management happen within a child site, when that's going to speed things up and to help people get more work done faster, Delegate. Set up site admins, give people admin access to this very protected place where they can't break your ADP import, and let that just move things along. And the last thing to keep in mind is all of the usage for child sites, all of the users and storage, all of that rolls up into your parent site. So you have the same tools available for monitoring how people are using it, how much has been used, and how much is this costing me next month. So that's a thing to keep an eye on. And with that, we come to the end, my friends, of our time together.
Awesome. Before our next session, we'll do a quick Q&A also. So anyone have any questions about child sites, how to use them, that sort of thing, just raise your hand.
My bestie.
Hi, Julie Olson with Turner Lee Design. Quick question on the amount of child sites. Sounds like you can have as many as you want, but does that, is there a cost implication to that?
They are not free, but you do get some included in your plan. And so here's why. So they're full sites. So they have IP addresses, they have full everything. And we actually have even people in the room who are using these for reseller purposes. So we have to be careful about how we sell them. But the way it works is if you're on the Premier plan, you can have 2 just out of the gate for free already. If you're on the Power plan, most of the people here can get a number of them as well. Basically, like for within reason, for most purposes, we can accommodate what you need in your current plan package. And if you're doing something crazy, then you might have to pay for it. So the short answer is talk to your account manager about that. But it's like if you're talking about adding 1 or 2, for majority of the cases, it can be free. If you're a huge customer and you're already spending 6 figures with us and you want to add 10 to 20 of these things, it's going to be free. If you're spending a low amount of money and you want to add hundreds of them, then you're going to have to pay. I guess is the basic summary.
Hi there, Travis Hausler with Health Center Partners. 2 questions. First, when creating a child site, are you able to just copy the rules and permissions from your parent folder to create that? Or are you kind of starting from scratch and you'll have to go back and forth to have those match?
Well, right now it's starting from scratch, but I am interested to hear more about what you would need with copying things forward. Do you have a one-on-one scheduled?
Yes, but not with R&D.
Oh, okay.
But I can get that scheduled. Second,
We're going to add other teams on the meeting as well when you have one-on-one. You just weren't told.
okay.
Well, let's clarify that. If it's with Wade and Alex, then you should book a separate one.
Yeah,
And
it's with
okay,
Wade and Alex.
yeah.
Yeah, so you have to express the interest, additional to Wade and Alex. Schedule something with the rest of the team, which will most likely include someone from customer success, product, and I believe engineering.
Yeah. In short, though, that's a feature that we already know is like broadly requested. It was requested at our last event. Like it's that's happening. I mean, I don't have a date, but like our goal is to get that done.
Okay, cool. Second question from like a child site administrator perspective. If we have all the users in the parent site and really kind of our use case here, we have a couple subsidiaries, and right now we have application champions where they're able to create users but can't do things like delete them, reset passwords, update their MFA. In the child site, are those site administrators able to do those functions there? And if the users live in the parent site and they're accessible in multiple child sites, are they still able to do that? Or does it have to be rolled up to the site administrator for the parent site?
All right, lots to unpack there. So you make somebody a child site admin, they are a site admin. They have all the permissions, they can do all the things, they can set up remotes, they can delete users, they can do all of it.
But
They
only on
can't-
that child site.
Only on that child site. They can't change anything that's in the parent site because they are a child site administrator. Now, folder admins in child sites, I want to say, can add parent site
Users to the folder.
to their folder.
Okay, so if we had all the users living in the parent site and the child site administrators were just adding them to the appropriate folders, are they able to do those administration changes like deleting them if they're only a child site administrator, or they'd have to be a parent folder administrator, or alternatively, you only set up those users in the child folder?
Correct. If you want the child site admins to be deleting them, then they should be set up on the child site.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Awesome question, though. All 4 of them.
Yeah, and these use cases are really evolving. I think we're up to about 250 customers using child sites right now, something like that. So like there's a lot of people taking advantage of this capability. So we are doing a lot of investing in this general area.
All right, let's call.
Great, thank you, Amy.
All right.